Carson Bale was once a brilliant medical student. Nicole Harris was a nurse who barely escaped with her life. Daniel Ruiz vanished without a trace. When Carson walked barefoot into Crestwood Psychiatric Hospital with no name and no history, it triggered a chain of chilling events no one could explain. Staff began to disappear. Security systems failed, and long-buried secrets surfaced along with evidence, linking him to a decade-old unsolved murder. This wasn't a man seeking help. It was a calculated return to the scene of something far more sinister. On the morning of August 12, 2017, a barefoot man wandered up the cracked pavement leading to Crestwood Psychiatric Hospital, just outside Sacramento, California. He moved with a strange calmness, unaffected by the sharp gravel beneath his feet or the blazing summer heat. He wore no shoes, carried no backpack, and bore no sign of recent contact with the outside world. His jeans were shredded at the knees, and his t-shirt looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. But what unsettled the front desk nurse the most were his arms covered in what looked like self-inflicted scratches. Deep and raw, when he reached the entrance, he didn't hesitate. He simply walked in, looked around, and said, "I think I need help." His voice was quiet, distant, as if he was reciting a line from a memory rather than speaking his own thoughts. The staff quickly escorted him to intake, asking the usual questions: name, date of birth, any medications, emergency contacts. But the man gave nothing. When asked his name, he only responded, "You already know." They assumed he was delusional, possibly schizophrenic, and decided to admit him under a 72-hour psychiatric hold. With no identification, he was logged. As John Doe, he was assigned to room 312 on the second floor. It was a standard observation: room white walls, barred window, padded furniture. But he didn't resist. He offered no complaints, made no demands. He followed every instruction without question. Still, something about him made the staff uneasy. It wasn't just his silence or the dead look in his eyes. It was the way he moved, slowly, deliberately, as if every step had a purpose only he understood. From the first night, his behavior was strange. He refused all meals, sitting on the bed with his back against the wall, arms wrapped around his knees. He never slept, at least not while anyone was watching. He didn't pace, didn't talk to himself, didn't lash out things typical patients might do. Instead, he fixated on the window. Every day, for hours at a time, he sat and stared through the bars at the same section of the hospital's outer fence. It was as if he were waiting for something or someone. The nurses kept notes: unresponsive, flat effect, possible trauma history. But none of them could pin down what exactly was wrong with him. During routine check-ins, he remained polite but empty. He answered basic questions with yes or no, but his eyes never matched his words. They were blank, like he wasn't really in the room. It was unsettling. Most new patients took at least a few days to calm down or adapt. This man was already still, already silent, already watching. By the third day, staff were whispering about him in the halls. Some said he was harmless, just another lost soul looking for shelter. Others weren't so sure. There was something too controlled about him, too precise. And none of them could explain why he never looked away from that one corner of the fence. They had taken him in thinking he was broken, but none of them had stopped to ask what might happen if he wasn't. 3 days after the unknown man was admitted to Crestwood Psychiatric Hospital, the routine calm of the facility began to fracture. It started subtly: missed breaks, unanswered intercoms, and small mistakes in patient records that nobody could explain. The hospital operated on a strict schedule, and any deviation, no matter how small, was quickly noticed. At first, the staff blamed exhaustion or clerical error. But then, 2 employees didn't clock out: Daniel Ruiz, a 42-year-old night security guard, and Nicole Harris, a 27-year-old intake nurse, were both on duty the evening of August 15th. They were last seen at around 1:30 a.m., conducting a routine check on the second floor, the same floor where the John Doe patient had been placed. When morning came, their absence raised alarms. Neither had signed out. Their lockers were untouched. Their cell phones remained in the staff lounge, fully charged. Both of their cars were still parked in the employee lot. Staff initially assumed They had gone home without logging out, an unusual move, but not impossible. But when phone calls went unanswered, and both failed to show up for their next shift, things escalated. A sweep of the hospital began, checking rooms, maintenance closets, and even the boiler basement. It was during this search that one of the janitors opened the access hatch to the laundry chute and discovered Nicole. She was unconscious but alive, curled up in a fetal position at the bottom of the shaft. Her uniform was soaked in sweat, her face scratched and pale. A deep bruise ran across her temple. She had no memory of how she got there. When paramedics arrived, she was barely coherent. The only thing she said before being taken away was, "Don't trust the quiet one." The other missing staff member, Daniel Ruiz, is nowhere to be found. Crestwood administrators immediately turned to security footage, hoping for answers. What they found only deepened the mystery. From 1:12 a.m. to 3:24 a.m., a crucial window. During the disappearance, the hallway cameras on the second floor had gone dark. A complete feed blackout. No other part of the hospital was affected. No power surge, no system failure. Just the corridor where the John Doe's room was located. When the footage resumed, nothing appeared out of place. The hall was quiet. Doors were closed. The patients were sleeping. And the man in room 312 still sitting on his bed, eyes on the window, unmoved. In meetings later that day, some staff suggested transferring the man to a higher security facility. Others wanted to keep him where he was under watch, restrained, isolated. But before any decision was made, he calmly requested a Bible and asked for a pencil. It was the first time he had spoken more than 2 words since his arrival. The request was granted. A nurse brought the items to his room and left. When she returned, an hour later to check on him, she found the Bible open to the book of Revelation. The pencil lay snapped in 2 beside it. On the wall above the bed, scratched faintly into the paint, were 3 words that made her blood run cold. She's still alive. The man known only as John Doe had now been inside Crestwood Psychiatric Hospital for 5 days, but the silence surrounding his identity was finally starting to crack. After Nicole Harris was found in the laundry chute and the hospital's surveillance system inexplicably blacked out, law enforcement was brought in. Standard procedure meant collecting fingerprints from every unidentified patient on hold. When they ran his prints through the national database, the results came back with a match that left everyone stunned. His name was Carson Bale. Once a top medical student at UC Davis, Carson disappeared in 2007 after being named a person of interest. In the brutal murder of a family in Fresno, the case had captured statewide attention at the time. Carter family, 2 parents, and their teenage daughter had been found murdered in their home, their bodies arranged in a disturbingly ritualistic pattern. Carson had been the last known person to visit them, claiming he had been helping the father, a former professor, with research. He was questioned, but never charged. A lack of evidence allowed him to slip through the cracks, and shortly after, he vanished completely. The case went cold. Now, 10 years later, he had walked into a psychiatric hospital as if nothing had happened. As investigators began to connect the dots, the staff at Crestwood grew more uneasy. They combed through the facility's internal logs and found disturbing anomalies. Several patient files had been accessed or altered within days of Carson's arrival. Names were removed. Diagnoses changed. Medications were swapped in the system without signatures or timestamps. More alarming was a sudden wave of voluntary discharge. 5 patients had left in the span of 2 days, all of whom had previously shown no signs of wanting to leave. When reached later by phone, 2 of them told a similar story. They believed someone in the hospital was watching them, following them, whispering things to them that made them feel unsafe. It became clear Carson hadn't entered Crestwood by accident. His arrival was planned. His silence was not confusion, but strategy. Investigators began to theorize that he had embedded himself in the hospital to observe or manipulate something from within. But what that was, no one could say for certain. While the outside world raced to understand who Carson really was, strange events continued inside. Medical carts went missing. Locked doors were found ajar. One nurse reported hearing the same piece of music playing faintly from an empty therapy room each night, tan old piano melody. Warped and slow, staff began calling in sick. A general sense of unease crept through the halls. Meanwhile, Carson remained in his room, rarely blinking, eyes locked on the same piece of fence outside. The window he stared through looked over a disused courtyard, long abandoned after a failed renovation. No patients went there, no staff bothered with it. Yet Carson never took his eyes off it. It was as though he wasn't watching something. He was waiting for something to appear. By the 7th night of Carson Bale's stay at Crestwood Psychiatric Hospital, the atmosphere inside the facility had changed completely. What had once been a structured clinical environment now pulsed with anxiety. Staff moved more quietly. Patients whispered about noises in the walls and shadows in their rooms. Some refused medication, others refused to sleep. Even the most seasoned nurses admitted feeling watched, though they couldn't explain by whom. There were no outbursts, no violent incidents, only a thick, lingering sense that something was building. On the night of August 20th, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the hospital's fire alarm began to scream. What was initially assumed to be a small electrical issue quickly unraveled into something far more chaotic. When emergency responders arrived, they were greeted by flickering lights, the sound of running water, and confusion among the night staff. Several patient room doors had been opened. Medical supply closets were ransacked. The records office, which was normally locked and monitored, had been broken into. Dozens of paper files were scattered. Across the floor, some half-burned, others completely missing. But the most disturbing discovery was in the security office. Every hard drive connected to the hospital surveillance system was gone. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows. Nothing on camera, because the cameras had all gone offline the moment the alarm began. What remained of the digital system was useless. Carson's room was the first place the responders checked. It was empty. His bed was neatly made. His Bible had been left open to the same passage, Revelation 6, the Four Horsemen. The pencil he had requested days earlier was snapped again, this time with one piece jammed under the mattress. Beneath it was a folded blueprint of the hospital. It showed the layout of the 2nd and 3rd floors. On it were strange red markings, some over patient rooms, others over staff quarters, and 2 drawn directly over the rooms previously used by Nicole Harris and Daniel Ruiz. In his absence, staff combed through his room more thoroughly, scratched. Lightly into the underside of the bed frame were dozens of names. Most meant nothing. But 4 of them matched names from active missing persons cases across California, people who had disappeared over the past 18 months. Each from different cities, with no connections. Now their names were hidden in a psychiatric room in Sacramento. Investigators widened the search, setting up checkpoints in the area. Carson had vanished without a trace. His hospital gown was later found in the trash behind the building, replaced by street clothes no one recognized. How he had managed to change, evade staff, steal data, and disappear during an emergency remained unanswered. What was undeniable, though, was that he had come with a plan. From the moment he walked into Crestwood, every step had been calculated. The stolen files, the staff disappearances, the name carvings. The red marks on the floor plan. Carson hadn't escaped from something. He had completed something. Nearly. 6 months after Carson Bale vanished from Crestwood Psychiatric Hospital, a group of squatters broke into an abandoned house on the outskirts of Sacramento, property long neglected and hidden behind a thicket of trees. It once belonged to a retired physician who died the year before. It was assumed to be empty. But when police were called to remove the trespassers, they discovered something inside that would reignite the investigation into Carson's disappearance and raise new, disturbing questions. The basement had been converted into a makeshift laboratory. It wasn't just cluttered with junk. It was deliberate, organized, precise. The walls were covered in documents, pinned edge to edge, most of them medical records. Some were photocopies of Crestwood patient charts. Others belonged to people no one recognized. In the corner, a rusted Metal table held a stack of cassette tapes, each labeled by hand with first names and dates. On a looped wire above the desk hung photographs of hospital corridors, patient doors, and Crestwood's administrative wing. They had been taken secretly from inside the building, but the centerpiece of the room was a single, faded group photo. It showed a team of about 20 staff members standing in front of Crestwood's entrance. The photo had been taken years ago, in 2007, and was framed with dust and cracks. Near the back of the group, partially obscured by another figure, stood a face that hadn't appeared on any employee record: Carson Bale. At the time, the photo had gone unnoticed, filed away in a staff archive never reviewed. But here it was, displayed with purpose. Below it, written in thick red marker directly on the wall, were the words, "They never knew I never left." The discovery shocked authorities. It confirmed what some investigators had already begun to suspect, that Carson had not only walked into Crestwood in 2017 with a plan, but had a deep and hidden history with the hospital. Records revealed he had briefly volunteered there in early 2007 during a graduate internship. Under an alias, no background check had flagged him. No one had realized who he really was. That meant Carson hadn't returned to unfamiliar ground. He had returned to familiar territory, one he had studied from within years before. He knew the layout, the routines, the blind spots. He had used his time there not to seek treatment, but to gather information, observe behaviors, and execute something far more methodical than anyone had imagined. What was left behind in that basement raised the possibility that Crestwood was only one chapter in a longer, more sinister journey. Authorities tried to trace where Carson might have gone next, but every lead dried up. The name trail stopped. No fingerprints surfaced again. The tapes were reviewed, but many were blank, distorted or filled with hours of static. One contained faint breathing and the sound of shuffling, possibly recorded inside a patient's room. The hospital shut down less than a year later. Officially, the closure was blamed on funding and a series of internal violations. Unofficially, the staff who remained said no one wanted to be there anymore. Carson Bale had walked through the front doors without resistance. He had watched, waited, and disappeared into thin air. And what terrified everyone the most was not that he had returned, it was the growing fear that he had never truly left.